Most people think they're buying a house. They're not. They're buying a monthly payment. And that's exactly what the banks want you to think. Look, I need to show you something that nobody talks about when you're sitting in that real estate office, signing papers, thinking you just made the best decision of your life. Because what I'm about to break down for you is going to completely change how you see mortgages, home buying, and why so many people are stuck living paycheck to paycheck despite owning a home. This is about the monthly payment trap, and chances are, if you own a home or you're thinking about buying one, you're either already in it or you're about to walk right into it. So here's what happened to my neighbor, Sarah. She makes decent money, around 70,000 a year. Not rich, but comfortable. She was renting a small apartment for about 1200 bucks a month, and everyone kept telling her the same thing. You're throwing money away on rent. You need to buy a house, build equity, stop making your landlord rich. Sounds familiar, right? Sarah goes house shopping. She finds this beautiful 3 bedroom house listed at $350,000. Now, she doesn't have $350,000, obviously, but the bank tells her she doesn't need it. She just needs to qualify for the monthly payment. And here's where it starts. The loan officer sits down with her and says, "Good news. Based on your income, you qualify for a mortgage. Your monthly payment will be around $2,000. Sarah thinks about it. She's paying $1,200 in rent. $2,000 for a mortgage doesn't sound that bad, especially since she'll own the place, right? She's building equity. She's investing in her future. This is what responsible adults do. So she says yes. But here's what nobody explained to Sarah. That $2,000 monthly payment, that's not just $2,000. Let me break down what that payment actually includes. First, there's the principal. That's the actual money going toward paying off the house. Then there's the interest, which is what the bank charges you for lending you the money. Then you've got property taxes, homeowners insurance, and if you put down less than 20%, you're also paying something called PMI, which is private mortgage insurance. So that $2,000 gets split up into all these different pieces. And in the beginning, most of that money is going to interest, not to actually owning the house. To the bank, in Sarah's case, in her first month, about $1,400 of that $2,000 payment went straight to interest. Only $600 actually went toward the principal, toward actually owning more of the house. But Sarah doesn't know this. All she knows is her monthly payment is $2,000 and she can afford it. Now, here's where the trap gets worse because Sarah's not just paying the mortgage. She now owns a house, which means she's responsible for everything that goes wrong with it. The water heater breaks, that's $1,500. Roof needs repair, that's $5,000. A C unit dies in the middle of summer, another $4,000. When she was renting, her landlord handled all of that. Now it's on her. Plus, she's got utilities. And because the house is bigger than her old apartment, those bills are higher too. Electric, gas, water, trash, internet. It all adds up. So now Sarah's actual monthly cost of owning this home isn't $2,000. It's more like $2,500 or $3,000 when you average out the maintenance and repairs over the year. But wait, it gets even more interesting because Sarah bought this house with a 30-year mortgage at a 4.5% interest rate. Do you know how much she's actually going to pay for this $350,000 house by the time she owns it, free and clear? Over $600,000. Let me say that again. She's buying a house listed at $350,000, and by the time she pays off the mortgage 30 years from now, she'll have paid over $600,000 total. That extra $250,000, that's interest. That's the cost of borrowing the money. That's what the bank makes off of her, but nobody talks about that. They just talk about the monthly payment, and this is the trap. Because when you're only thinking about whether you can afford the monthly payment, you're not thinking about the total cost. You're not thinking about the opportunity cost of that money. You're not thinking about what else you could do with an extra $800 or $1,000 a month. You're just thinking, can I make this payment every month without going broke? And the answer for most people is barely. They can barely afford it. So they buy the house and now they're locked in because that mortgage payment is due every single month no matter what. You can't just decide to skip a month because money's tight. You can't downsize easily if you lose your job because selling a house takes time and costs money. You're stuck. This is exactly what the banks and the real estate industry want. They want you focused on the monthly payment because it makes expensive things seem affordable. It's the same trick car dealerships use. Don't worry about the total price. Can you afford $400 a month? And people say yes without doing the math. Here's another thing. Sarah's house was appraised at $350,000 when she bought it, but what's it actually worth? Well, that depends on the market, and the market goes up and down. 2 years after Sarah bought her house, there was a downturn in her local real estate market. Houses in her neighborhood were now selling for around $320,000, but Sarah still owes over $340,000 on her mortgage because she's barely paid down any principal. So now she's underwater. She owes more than the house is worth. If she needed to sell for any reason, she'd have to come up with the difference. She's trapped. And this happens to millions of people. They buy at the peak of the market, thinking prices will keep going up forever, and then reality hits. But let's go back to this monthly payment thing because it gets even more insidious. The reason this trap works so well is because of how our brains are wired. We're terrible at thinking about the long term. We're much better at thinking about right now. Can I afford $2,000 a month right now? Is an easy question to answer. What will my life look like in 10 years if I commit to this payment is much harder. So we go with the easy question, and we end up making decisions that lock us into financial stress for decades. Here's what really blows my mind. Most people spend more time researching what TV to buy than they do understanding their mortgage. They'll read reviews for hours to save $50 on a television, but they'll sign mortgage documents without really understanding what they're agreeing to. And the system is designed to make it confusing. All the jargon, all the fees, all the fine print. It's overwhelming on purpose because if you really understood what you were signing up for, you might think twice. Now, I'm not saying buying a house is always a bad decision. That's not the point. The point is that most people make the decision based on the wrong factors. They make it based on whether they can afford the monthly payment, not on whether it actually makes financial sense for their situation. Let me give you another example. I know a guy who bought a house because the monthly payment was only slightly more than his rent. Seemed like a no-brainer, right? But he didn't factor in that he was planning to switch careers in a couple years, which would mean a pay cut. He didn't think about the fact that he might want to move to a different city for opportunities. He didn't consider that being locked into a mortgage would limit his flexibility. 2 years later, he got an amazing job offer in another state. Way better pay, better career prospects, everything he wanted, but he couldn't take it because he was locked into this house. He couldn't sell it quickly without taking a loss, and he couldn't afford to carry two housing payments while waiting for it to sell. So he turned down the job. He stayed stuck in a position he'd outgrown because of a decision he made based purely on a monthly payment. That's opportunity cost. That's what the monthly payment trap doesn't show you. It doesn't show you all the doors that close when you say yes to that mortgage. Here's something else that's crazy. The bank knows way more about whether you can afford this house than you do. They've run all the numbers. They know your income, your debts, your credit score, everything, and they've determined that you can afford this payment. But can afford doesn't mean it's a good idea. The bank's definition of can afford is basically won't default immediately. They don't care if you're stressed, if you can't save money, if you're one emergency away from disaster. They care about whether you'll keep making payments. And here's the thing, they've designed the system so that most people will keep making payments no matter what. Because losing your house is terrifying. So people will sacrifice everything else to keep making that mortgage payment. They'll drain their savings, put other bills on credit cards, skip medical care, whatever it takes. The house becomes a trap that forces you to keep working, keep grinding, keep sacrificing just to keep the roof over your head. Let me show you how the math really works over time. Let's say you buy a house with a 30-year mortgage. For the first 10 years, the majority of your payment is going to interest. You're basically renting the money from the bank while slowly, very slowly, building equity. In Sarah's case, after 5 years of paying $2,000 a month, she's paid a total of $120,000 to the bank, but only about $40,000 of that went toward actually owning the house. The other $80,000, interest, gone, paid to the bank for the privilege of borrowing their money. And if she sells the house after 5 years, she's got to pay realtor fees, closing costs, all of that. So even if the house appreciated a little bit in value, she might barely break even or even lose money. But you know what the real kicker is? During those same 5 years, if Sarah had stayed in her $1,200 apartment and invested the difference between her rent and what she's paying for the house, including all the extra costs, she could have built up a significant amount of wealth. Let's say the difference is about $1,000 a month when you factor in everything. If she invested that for 5 years with average market returns, she'd have over $70,000, liquid, accessible, money she could use for opportunities, emergencies, whatever she needed. Instead, she's got a house that she barely owns, that she can't easily convert to cash, and that requires constant maintenance and money. Now, some of you are thinking, but what about equity? What about the fact that the house might appreciate in value? And sure, that can happen. Over long periods of time, real estate generally goes up in value, but it's not guaranteed, and it's not always as much as people think. The average home appreciation rate in the U.S. is around 3 to 4% per year. That's not nothing, but it's also not the home run people imagine. And that's before you factor in all the costs of ownership. When you account for maintenance, repairs, property taxes, insurance, and the interest you're paying, the actual return on investment is often much lower than just putting money in an index fund. But people don't think about it that way. They think, I bought this house for $350,000 and now it's worth $450,000. I made $100,000. Except they didn't. They paid $2,000 a month for 10 years. That's $240,000 in payments, plus all the maintenance and repairs. So even if the house is worth $100,000 more, they're not really ahead by that much. Here's what the real estate industry doesn't want you to know. The monthly payment trap is how they get you in the door. It's how they make you feel like you can afford something that's actually a huge financial commitment. They'll say things like, you're paying rent anyway, why not build equity? Or mortgage rates are so low right now, you can't afford not to buy. Or prices are only going up. If you don't buy now, you'll be priced out forever. These are all designed to make you focus on the short term and ignore the bigger picture. They want you thinking about the monthly payment, not the 30-year commitment, not the total cost, not the loss of flexibility and freedom. So, what's the alternative? Well, first, if you're going to buy a house, you need to understand the full cost, not just the monthly payment. Look at the total amount you'll pay over the life of the loan. Calculate how much is going to interest. Factor in maintenance, repairs, property taxes, insurance, all of it. Then compare that to your alternatives. What if you rented and invested the difference? What if you bought a smaller, cheaper house? What if you waited and saved a bigger down payment so you'd pay less interest? Second, think about your life plans. Are you going to stay in this area for at least 5 to 7 years? Because if not, buying probably doesn't make sense. The transaction costs of buying and selling a house are high. Third, make sure you have an emergency fund before you buy. And I mean a real emergency fund, at least 6 months of expenses, because when you own a house, emergencies are going to happen. Fourth, Don't max out what the bank says you can afford. Just because they'll lend you $500,000 doesn't mean you should borrow that much. Keep your housing costs to no more than 25% of your take home pay if you can. And remember that owning a house is not the only path to financial security. Renting is not throwing money away, it's paying for flexibility. The real trap isn't renting versus owning. The real trap is making financial decisions based on what society tells you you're supposed to do instead of what actually makes sense for your situation. So the next time someone tells you to stop throwing money away on rent, remember this. Remember that the monthly payment is just one small piece of a much bigger financial puzzle. Everyone in the transaction has an incentive to get you to say yes. Nobody except you has an incentive to make sure it's actually the right decision for your life. If this opened your eyes, check out the next video where I break down why timing the real estate market is impossible.